relations or countries such as Italy and India can work together. The role of India as holding the presidency of the G20 is a very strategic role indeed. Together we can build a different narrative. We're talking about one of the largest democracies of the world.
Prime Minister, your speech covered a very wide canvas. I was particularly impressed by the candidness in your assessment of the world today, and also your fondness for the relationship. So let me first start with the bilateral. India and Italy. What does the future hold for us?
Dunque, intanto grazie.
Thank you for this invitation. This is an initiative which I deem especially important because we are going through times when we desperately need to ask ourselves questions. Things are changing around us everywhere. And the political debate at the national and international debate has like a short breath, short range, limited scope. In other words, something that does not go beyond the immediate reality. We didn't realize what could happen, and we didn't realize the grand number of false or anyway wrong ideas that just had in our ideas, which have exploded inevitably when the first shock hurt. And that was the COVID-19 pandemic. And this made us realize that some of our beliefs had no grounds and how some of our realities were not ready. So I think that times like these are useful because the title of this edition was very interesting, but I also saw from the titles of the previous editions that you always ask very deep questions. Thank you. And I tried to answer the questions starting from the bilateral relations between Italy and India, because I came here willingly to participate to Raisina dialogue, but also wanted this to be the first bilateral meeting of Italy with the new government in Asia. We are geographically distant, but very similar on a number of issues. During my speech, I mentioned the peninsularity, the special condition which makes us similar. In other words, we are used to look beyond our borders, but at the same time strongly anchored to our belonging to our continent. And as you probably know, I am trying to strongly move Italy towards the Mediterranean, the enlarged Mediterranean, that for me includes Indo-Pacific. The sea today and the sea in between, which links us, is the major interconnection. And we are showing this because one of the things that Italy and India are doing now is also the project for the digital interconnection between two nations which are apparently geographically so far apart. We are also nations which have a thousands-old tradition, very ancient tradition. Even if these states are relatively young, we know that the value of identity is very important today in a period where someone would like to erase it, to sell everybody the same product, whereas our richness is the specificity of our culture. And this is also an object of cooperation between Italy and India, which we want to enhance. We said this today with Modi, and so many sectors in which we want to cooperate. The trade, of course, we made a major headway. In 2 years, our trade has more than doubled. But I think that we can do even more than that. And also when it comes to defense policy, strategies like space, cybersecurity, science. We have the Indian community in Italy, which is a very large community, And this is a source of strength in terms of the interconnectivity between our respective cultures, because I'm talking here about students who come to study, people who come to work in Italy. They become ambassadors of our relations and cultures. So I think that we do have a number of sectors in which cooperate in. Priorities, environmental transition, energy security. It was very forward looking from India to aim high when it comes to renewables. So sending out a message when it comes to energy security and modernity for the global South nations. And the Indian presidency in G20 is very much help to not to create a division between Western and the West and the rest of the world, which would be absolutely superficial.
Secondo me è assolutamente superficiale come lettura.
No, in fact, perhaps that could be my next question to you, and I'm going to ask you one more at the end. But West versus the rest, that's the term you used in your speech today at Raisina. It is real. If you travel around the world, you see it's not a, a concocted idea. People actually feel that. Can we overcome this divide, this difference, this division, where the developed world and the developing world, north, south, east, west, these divisions, how can we overcome these?
We have absolutely to.
We absolutely must overcome old or obsolete divisions, which are obsolete because of our modern times. We have the Ukrainian conflict, which from this standpoint doesn't help. And paradoxically, it risks increasing this division if we wrongly interpret the reason why, for instance, Italy decides strongly, and to support the Ukraine as opposed to the Russian invasion, because the problem is not so much the relation between two nations, which are both close to us, but it's about international sovereignty, respecting the laws, the rules. If we accept that those who are militarily strongly can invade their neighbor, then nobody will be safer anymore. And this has an impact across the board. So the invasion of the Ukraine has had a domino effect in terms of consequences for our society, which has especially impacted the South, those which were already in major difficulties. So it would be strong and superficial to say, on the one hand, we have the West, and then we have the West of the world, which are divided because of a game of power. We have to set up a mechanism which is also based on multilateral relations, where there needs to have a scope of respect of territorial sovereignty, what I refer to the force of the law and not the law of the strongest. So relations with countries such as Italy and India can work together. I think the role of India as holding the presidency of the G20 is a very strategic role indeed. We're talking about one of the largest democracies of the world. We're talking about a nation which, when it comes to the rule of the law and abiding by the rules, has set up its multilateral relations. A nation which, when it comes to Ukrainian conflict, because of the historic relations it has, which puts India today in a condition of being in a position to dialogue with the parties. We really hope that the next G20 summit will give us the opportunity to make additional headway as opposed to what we've done in Bali, because also to facilitate dialogue and diplomacy for the solution of the conflict, because I repeat, once again, this will have an impact on everybody and on the weakest. So it is in the interest of everybody, and on the Western countries such as Italy and of the rest nations such as India, that together we can build a different narrative of what we can do to overcome divisions.
Portare ancora divaricazione.
Prime Minister, final question. As we navigate these troubled times, something you mentioned in your speech, what is it that you fear in terms of what's what is it that keeps you up at night as the prime minister of a very proud nation? What worries you in terms of what could go wrong? Climate change, technology, divisions of society. What is it that occupies your mind as something that we have to work to prevent happening?
Well, it's not easy to say for everything.
All the problems that we have are interconnected. I haven't been very lucky from this point of view because I've been in politics ever since I was 15, and I became prime minister at 45 after 30 years of political commitment in one of the hardest times of Italy ever. And so when you feel responsible, you're responsible for millions of people. Of course, it's not able to sleep at night. And what you better understand, what you realize is to what extent our destinies are interconnected. Because if you were to ask me what I did not expect becoming a prime minister, and what I did not expect is the impossibility, the difficulty in planning everything that happens, wherever it happens, somehow it affects you. And this is indeed the history of recent years, the history of what we have not adequately considered. I mentioned during my speech this, for instance, the supply chain issue. Europe has responsibilities on this. We thought globalization, trade with no rules, trade with no rules would have solved all problems. It would have made increased democracies in less democratized nations. But exactly the opposite has happened. In other words, the regimes have become stronger. They've gone backwards in evolution through free trade, and us, we have become weakened because we were not controlling anything more, and we were no longer the rulers of our destinies. Yes, we see with energy yesterday, in the past with the pandemics, because the production, such as semiconductors and chips, were in the hands of China. When they have decided to go for their internal market, we have been in crisis. So when it comes to our two nations, the supply chain is another issue. You need to have your own strategy, decide what you don't want to give up to, what you don't want to give up to, and then work either on the national supply chains or on the friendshoring. In other words, nations with which you have a continuity in the relations, reliable, serious nations. This changes our perspective. This means that the problems that, say, for instance, if I had been prime minister 5 years ago, that I would have thought of, risk becoming a second level as opposed to other major issues. So because if you don't give answers today, the problem of employment or unemployment in your country would be impacted. You can come up with any kind of law. It doesn't depend on the laws that you are doing in your country. So I'm working very much on bilateral relations, on international policy, of course, because this is of help, but also because I think in Italian, because this is the real kickstart point. Because otherwise, everything you do at the national level, and in and of itself, would not solve things. So, getting to know other realities with which we had long-standing relations, we can understand a different perspective. Geographic position, our culture will help us on this, and you just keep an open mind.
Tiene la mente aperta.